In the fall of last year, I was exploring a remote area in the state of Montana to install trail cameras. I've always been fascinated by wildlife, and as a hobby, I used to record the movements of bears, moose, and cougars that roamed those dense forests. On that particular day, I had driven for nearly 2 hours along back roads until I found a promising spot on the edge of a forest reserve, a place where few ventured. The trail I chose was near a shallow stream. The ground was covered with damp leaves, and the air had that strong smell of moss and wet wood. I walked about 1.5 kilometers into the woods, dodging twisted branches and protruding roots, until I found a perfect open space for the cameras to be installed. I positioned 3 cameras strategically along a beaten path, evident by the number of animal footprints on the soggy ground. The sun barely passed through the treetops, creating an ambience of bluish shadows amid the morning mist. My every move seemed amplified by the absolute silence of the forest, as if it was watching me instead of the other way around. After testing the equipment and making sure they were recording in night mode, I finished my work and started the trail back to my truck. On the way, I found a group of morel mushrooms growing at the base of a fallen log and picked a few, pleased with the little bonus of my trip. Everything seemed normal until it wasn't. 3 days later, I returned to the site to collect the recordings. The weather was grey and cold, with an icy wind blowing through the tall branches, making them creak like old wooden planks. I retrieved the 3 cameras and returned to my truck, excited to see what I had captured. But as soon as I inserted the first SD card into my laptop, I realized something was wrong. 2 of the cameras had recorded absolutely nothing, as if they had been manually turned off. In the third, there was also no video recorded, only 4 static images, as if they were photos my stomach turned as soon as I saw the images. The first showed only the empty forest, exactly as I left it. The second made me freeze. A woman in a long faded dress was standing in the middle of the trail. He had too pale skin, and his hair fell over his face in a strange way, hiding his features. She held something to her chest, an old, dirty, deformed doll. The third image was even worse. She was now closer, her face still obscured by hair, but her eyes shone under the shadow. The dress looked more torn than before, as if it was unraveling in the wind. The fourth and final image showed the empty trail again, as if it had never been there. A chill ran down my spine. I knew that forest. It was an isolated area, with no tourist trails, no houses nearby. No one should be there, least of all a woman dressed as if she had come out of another century. I swallowed, looking around, as if I suddenly expected to see her standing there among the trees. Instinct told me to get out of there as soon as possible, and that's exactly what I did. But that night, sitting on my couch, with the images magnified on the laptop screen, little did I know that bringing those images home was the biggest mistake I made. The first strange thing happened that same night. As I reviewed the images, I felt a change in the temperature of the environment, a sudden dense cold. Goosebumps ran through my body, and I instinctively looked around. Nothing seemed out of place, but the feeling that I wasn't alone was impossible to ignore. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination working against me, so I turned off the computer and went to sleep. But sleep did not come easy. In the middle of the night, I was awakened by a low, rhythmic sound echoing through the house. Footsteps. My heart raced instantly. I lived alone and always locked all the doors before going to sleep. I held my breath, trying to hear better. The steps were slow, hesitant, as if someone was exploring the environment. They came from the corridor that led to the living room. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my rifle, and walked cautiously to the bedroom door. When I opened it, the sound stopped. The hallway was empty. The only light came from the faint glow of my notebook, still on the living room table. I stood there, for a while listening, waiting, nothing. After a few minutes, I closed the computer, checked all the locks, and went back to bed. But I didn't sleep anymore. The following days were marked by subtle but disturbing events. Objects that I was sure where they were appeared in different places. The sound of footsteps in the hallway was repeated on other nights, always waking me up in the middle of the night. And worst of all, I began to see shadows moving in my peripheral vision. dark shadows that disappeared when I tried to focus on them. Fatigue began to weigh down, and my mood became darker. I needed to understand what was happening. That's when I made the most dangerous decision of my life, to go back to the forest. But this time I would go prepared. I took extra cameras, perimeter alarms, and glow sticks to mark my position. I wanted proof of what was happening. I wanted answers. Upon arriving at the place, the environment seemed different, heavier. The wind was still, and the forest was too quiet. As he set up the equipment, the feeling of being watched intensified. Each snap of a branch sounded louder than it should, and I felt the invisible gaze fixed on me. As night fell, I positioned myself in the middle of the camera circle, holding my flashlight and something to protect myself. The plan was simple: wait and see what happened. For hours, nothing but absolute silence. But shortly after midnight, everything changed. A violent rumble resounded through the woods, as if something was hitting the earth with brutal force. My alarms went off at the same time. Fear hit me like a punch in the stomach. Something was there, and this time it wasn't just a shadow on my peripheral vision. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my backpack and something to protect myself, and began to retreat toward the exit trail. But the forest looked different. Each step seemed to take me to an unknown place, as if the path was changing. The trees, once familiar, now formed an oppressive labyrinth. The sound of the alarm still echoed in the distance, mixed with a new noise. A kind of whisper, low and irregular, coming from all directions. My heart pounded in my chest. With each meter traveled, the whisper increased, as if something was approaching. The flashlight flickered in my hand as I tried to illuminate my surroundings. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a movement, a silhouette among the trees, still, motionless. The flashlight failed for a second, and when it returned to normal, the figure was no longer there. The air became heavy, almost impossible to breathe. I moved on, forcing my legs to continue. That's when the ground gave way under my feet. I fell, sharply into a shallow hole, my body plunging into the damp earth. The smell of rotting leaves and wet roots filled my nostrils. I stood up quickly, trying to ignore the pain in my ankle, and kept running. My body was asking for rest, but my mind knew that stopping was not an option. After what seemed like an eternity, I finally saw the metallic glow of my pickup truck reflecting the moonlight. I forced myself to take the last steps, my body exhausted. I reached for the doorknob, already feeling an irrational relief, when everything around me went out. The next thing I remember is sitting in the driver's seat. My backpack, which I was sure was with me, was now in the passenger seat. My clock struck 3 hours after the moment I had seen the truck. I had no memory of what happened in the meantime. My hands trembled as I started the engine and sped back home, trying to make sense of what had just happened to me. The dirt road seemed endless as I drove home. My body trembled, not only from the cold, but from the dread of what I might have experienced in that lapse of time. My clothes were smeared with mud, my boots covered in leaves, as if I had rolled across the forest floor. What scared me the most was not the lost time, but the feeling that something was still with me. The air inside the truck felt heavy, suffocating. The silence was so absolute that my own thoughts seemed too loud. At every turn I looked in the rearview mirror, expecting to see a figure in the back seat. When I finally got home, I felt a momentary relief. I parked in the backyard, got out of the car with shaky legs, and ran inside, locking the door behind me. My house, my refuge, suddenly seemed smaller, too cramped. I threw the backpack on the floor and went straight to the bathroom, turning on the hot water at maximum. The water running down my face should bring me back to reality, but it didn't. The image of the woman in the photos, her torn dress, and the deformed doll was still etched in my mind. And for the first time, I felt that it wasn't all in the woods. That night I was so tired that I fainted in bed. But sleep did not bring rest. I dreamed of the forest, of the rumblings echoing through the trees. I dreamed of a presence standing at the foot of my bed, watching, motionless. In the middle of the night, I woke up with my heart racing and the feeling that I was not alone. The room was dark, but my instinct screamed that there was something there. I held my breath, expecting to hear any sound. Then, from the hallway came a low noise, almost a whisper, a distant sound of something scratching the wood on the floor. My body froze. I wanted to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but the sound was real. I took my cell phone next to the bed and turned on the flashlight, illuminating the room. Nothing. The hallway, however, looked even darker than before. I got out of bed slowly, trying not to make noise, and walked to the door. The silence was now total, as if the house itself was holding its breath. With a trembling hand, I reached for the doorknob and opened the door slowly. The dim light from the street came in through the living room window, revealing elongated shadows on the floor. The hallway was empty, but the feeling that I was being watched had never been stronger. For a long time I stood there waiting for something to happen, but nothing came. After a while I closed the door and went back to bed, not daring to turn off the light. I closed my eyes, trying to ignore the growing discomfort. But in the minutes before I finally fell asleep, I was sure of one thing. The silence around me was unnatural. It was a forced, tense silence, as if something was hiding, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. In the following days, I tried not to think too much. I tried to control stress and tiredness. I went back to my routine, keeping my mind busy, but the feeling of being watched never completely disappeared. Whenever I passed through the hallway at night, I found myself quickening my pace, feeling an invisible pressure on me. Small details began to bother me. Doors that seemed to be ajar when I was sure I had closed them, objects slightly out of place, shadows that seemed to move in the corner of the vision. I needed to believe it was just paranoia, but my intuition screamed that it wasn't. One night, while working on the laptop, I decided to review the trail camera photos again. The idea gave me goosebumps, but I needed to understand what really happened in that forest. I zoomed in on the image of the woman, holding the doll, and focused on the details. The dress was dirty, worn, and the doll looked even more distracting under the new lighting. But it was then that I realized something I hadn't seen before. Behind her, among the trees, there was something else, a dark figure, larger than a human, almost camouflaged by darkness. A chill took over my body. I wasn't just dealing with that woman. My instinct was to close the notebook and pretend I had never seen it, but it was too late. My heart pounded as I looked around the room, feeling the environment become heavy, suffocating. My eyes returned to the screen, and for a moment I had the impression that the eyes of the woman in the photo were now directly fixed on me, more intense, more alive. I swallowed hard and turned off the computer. I didn't want to see those images anymore. They brought something I didn't know how to push away. From that night on, the nightmares became more frequent. I dreamed of the forest, but it wasn't just a memory. In the dream, I was in the same place where I placed the cameras, but everything looked different. The trees were bigger, twisted, as if they were alive. And then I saw her, the woman standing right where she appeared in the picture. Only now it moved. Slowly, she lifted the doll, pointing at me. Behind her, the dark figure writhed, taking shape. But before I could understand what it was, I would wake up sweaty with a heavy chest, feeling that something was next to me. So I decided that I needed to get rid of the memory card and erase the photos. The next day, I took the card to an empty lot on the outskirts of the city, where I made a fire and threw it inside. I watched the plastic twist and crumble in the flames, feeling momentary relief. I returned home believing that by destroying the evidence, I would also be getting rid of whatever it was. But that night, as I was trying to sleep, I heard a sound that made me freeze in bed. A slight scratching on the bedroom door, followed by an almost inaudible whisper. The sound was soft, almost imperceptible, but enough to make every strand of my body stand on end. I held my breath and forced myself not to move, listening attentively. The scratching was repeated, more insistent. My heart was beating so hard that I could hear it in my ears. Everything inside me screamed not to open the door, to ignore whatever was on the other side. After endless minutes, silence filled the room again. I lay motionless, waiting for any other sound, any other movement, but nothing happened. Only after a long time did I manage to muster up the courage to stand up and check. I walked slowly to the door, the wooden floor creaking beneath my feet. The doorknob was cool to the touch, I held my breath and opened carefully, feeling an icy cold coming from the hallway, but there was nothing there. No mark, no sign that something or someone was standing there moments before. From that night on, the demonstrations became more subtle, but they did not disappear. Somehow I knew that destroying the memory card hadn't solved the problem. It was as if whatever was haunting me had found another way to stay. Little things kept happening. Strange reflections in the windows, a slightly sweet perfume in the air for no apparent reason. The constant feeling that something was always lurking. The fear was no longer intense all the time, but it was there, like a sleeping presence, waiting for a moment to awaken. I started to avoid being alone at home for a long time. My friends realized something was wrong, but I never told the truth. He only said that he had been having insomnia, nightmares. Sometimes, while talking to someone, I felt a weight on my shoulders, an invisible shadow hovering behind me. But if I turned around too quickly, I would only find emptiness. I learned to live with it, to ignore the sensations, to move on. But deep down, I knew that I would never be completely free of what I found in that forest. Time passed, and little by little the occurrences became less frequent. The shadows in the corner of vision, the whispers, the unsettling presence, everything seemed to diminish. Even the nightmares began to fade. It was then that for a moment I thought that maybe my life was returning to normal. But on the last night before I wrote this, something happened. Something small but enough to make me realize that I will never be completely safe. On the screen of my notebook, where before there was only the reflection of the light from the room, for a second I saw something else, a silhouette, a figure standing behind me. I froze for a moment, unable to move. My whole body tensed as my eyes remained fixed on the screen, trying to process what I had just seen. The reflection lasted only a second, but it was enough for my heart to race. I spun the chair in a sudden movement, staring at the room behind. Me, nothing. Only the empty walls, the closet ajar, the dim light of the lamp flickering on the desk. Even so, the air around me felt colder, denser, as if something had just disappeared. I took a deep breath, trying to convince myself that it was just tiredness. Maybe it was a shadow game, my mind playing tricks after so many sleepless nights, but an uncomfortable feeling remained. I got up slowly and checked every corner of the room, opening the closet, peering under the bed, like a terrified child. In the dark, I found nothing out of place, but the restlessness continued. My instincts screamed that I was not alone. I sat down again, this time pushing the notebook away. I didn't want to face that screen anymore. I ran my hands over my face, trying to think rationally. It didn't make sense. Whatever was tormenting me should have been stuck in that destroyed memory card. But somehow it seemed to have found another way to manifest itself. I didn't know if I was going crazy or if something truly inexplicable was happening. The only certainty was that it wasn't over. The silence of the room was overwhelming. I heard the clock ticking every second, a rhythmic, relentless sound. It was then that I felt something. A shiver went up the back of my neck, an almost electric sensation running through my skin. It wasn't a touch, not exactly, but the clear impression that there was something there, close enough to be felt, but not seen. Breath was caught in my throat. I didn't want to look around. I didn't want to give that a chance to show off. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to regain control. But then, in a corner of the room, a subtle sound cut through the silence. A slight scratch, like fingernails running through the wood of the baseboard. Low, insistent. My muscles locked. Fear took hold of me, a deep, irrational dread that made me want to run away. But I couldn't move. I just stood there, caught between the desire to escape and the terror of the unknown, waiting for what would come next. The scratching continued, rhythmic, insistent, as if something was testing my patience, waiting for my reaction. My whole body was stiff, and I could feel the cold sweat running down the back of my neck. I took a deep breath and, gathering my courage, reached out slowly, ready to turn on the main light in the room. The instant my fingers touched the switch, the sound stopped abruptly, leaving behind a suffocating silence. The heart hammered against my chest as my eyes searched every corner of the room. Nothing seemed out of place, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. Suddenly, a thought hit me like a blow. What if it had never been just in the woods? What if somehow I had brought something with me from the day I installed the cameras? The discomfort turned to despair, and I felt an almost uncontrollable urge to get out of there. I got up on an impulse and went to the bedroom door, but hesitated before opening it. Part of me knew that if there was something on the other side, I didn't want to see it. My fingers trembled as they turned the handle, and when the door opened, I found only the dark hallway of my house, silent and motionless. Still, I couldn't calm down. Something was different. The air seemed heavier, charged with an invisible presence that spread through the shadows. I spent the whole night awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with the light on, waiting for the next sign that I was not alone. But nothing happened. The clock kept ticking every minute as if mocking my paranoia. When the sun finally rose over the horizon, leaving the house bathed in a pale light, I allowed myself to relax a bit. Maybe it was just my tired mind. Perhaps fear had distorted reality. But then, as I got up and headed down the hallway, something on the floor made me stop. There, right in the middle of the carpet, was a small mark of dirt. A thin, jagged trail that led to my bedroom door. I bent down slowly, my heart racing, and touched the mark with my fingertips. The texture was moist, sticky, and a familiar smell rose up to my nostrils. Wet earth, the same one that covered the forest floor. I was paralyzed for a few seconds, staring at that dark dirt that stained the carpet. My stomach turned when I realized that it couldn't be there by chance. I hadn't left the house during the night, and I definitely hadn't set foot on land before going to sleep. A shiver ran down my spine, and a cold thought hit me. Something came in here while I was sleeping. I stood up slowly, trying to control the accelerated breathing, and followed the trail with my eyes. It led from my bedroom door to the end of the hallway, disappearing near the entrance to the living room. My whole body was on alert, as if at any moment something was going to come up. I walked with hesitant steps, more and more certain that I was not alone in that house. Arriving at the living room, I found more marks scattered on the floor, as if someone had walked there with their feet covered in mud. I approached one of them, and as I looked at it further, I realized that it wasn't just dirt. There were little pieces of leaves stuck to the dirt, as if they had been brought directly from the forest. My mind started spinning, trying to understand the impossible. I locked the doors before going to sleep. The windows were closed. Nothing should have gone in. The silence of the house became deafening. Each shadow seemed to hide something lurking, watching me closely. The air was charged with an invisible electricity, as if there was a presence there, waiting for me to perceive it. I turned slowly, muscles tense, feeling an icy shiver run through my skin. Then, without warning, a noise echoed through the house, the unmistakable sound of a door closing on its own. My heart almost jumped out of my chest. The sound came from the guest bedroom, a room I rarely used. Adrenaline blew up in my body as I fought the instinct to just run. I took a deep breath, trying to convince myself that there was a rational explanation for all this. But deep down I knew the truth. I was no longer alone in that house. Something had come with me from that forest, and now he was expecting me to make a mistake. Every fiber of my body screamed for me to run, but something made me stay. The door to the guest room was ajar, swaying slightly as if someone had just passed by. I swallowed, taking a hesitant step. The floor creaked under my weight, and just then, a faint sound came from the room. A whisper, so low I almost thought I had imagined it. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. My finger trembled as I touched the door, pushing it slowly. The beam of light revealed the empty room, the bed still intact, the closet closed. But then, my gaze fell to the floor. Marks of bare feet, wet and covered with dirt, led from the entrance of the bedroom to the closet. My chest tightened as I realized that the footprints were not leaving the room. They came from inside the closet. A wave of dread came over me. Something was inside. The closet door was closed, but the feeling that something on the other side was watching me was overwhelming. I stepped back, my breath unbalanced. I didn't need to open that door. I didn't need to see what was there. The thing had already followed me home. It had already entered my life. If I wanted to get rid of it, I needed to do something different. With my nerves on edge, I left the room and went straight to the living room. I took the photos on my computer and deleted everything. The original files, the backups, everything was destroyed. I got rid of the computer, burned my clothes from that night and left all the lights on. For 3 days I was on alert, waiting for any sign that it was still with me. But nothing else happened. No noise, no shadow, no presence. All simply stopped. Since then, I have never returned to that forest, and I have never installed trail cameras again. I don't know what that woman in the photo was or what came to me that night. I just know that whatever it is, I never want to see or feel it again. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel.